He was gone before sunrise, alone in a London flat that hid more secrets than fame ever revealed. Bon Scott, the electrifying frontman of AC/DC, lived fast, loved fiercely, and left the world stunned on that February morning in 1980. Behind the walls of his modest apartment, a private romance unfolded, far removed from the roaring crowds and thundering riffs. This is the story of a rock legend's hidden life, his untold love story, and the shocking death that changed rock history forever. Do you want to know what happened to Bon Scott almost half a decade ago? On the 15th of February 1980, Bon Scott attended a recording session with Malcolm and Angus Young, where the band was beginning work on what would become some of AC/DC's most iconic tracks for the Back in Black album. On this day, Scott did not sing or contribute lyrics. Instead, he played drums alongside the Young brothers as they worked on the early versions of Have a Drink on Me and Let Me Put My Love Into You. According to Malcolm Young, Scott also played drums on the track Hell's Bells, a claim corroborated years later by AC/DC drummer Simon Wright, who recalled Angus Young showing him a demo of Scott on drums for Back in Black. This session highlights Scott's versatility as a musician. His involvement in AC/DC extended beyond his signature vocals and lyricism, reaching into the band's instrumental foundation. Just days before, Scott had traveled with Mick Cox to London to visit friends in the French hard rock group Trust at the Scorpio Sound Studio. During this trip, Scott contributed to the English adaptation of the lyrics written by Trust's singer Bernie Bonvoisin for the English version of their album Répression. While there, the musicians engaged in an informal jam session of Ride On, which would become the last recording Scott ever participated in, capturing the raw, improvisational energy that had defined his career. These sessions underscore Scott's relentless dedication to music, even in the final days of his life. Tragically, Scott's life came to an abrupt end just a few days later. Sometime during the late evening of the 18th of February and into the early hours of the 19th of February 1980, after a night out at the London Club Music Machine, now known as KOKO, Scott was left to sleep in a Renault 5 owned by his friend Alistair Kirriemuir at 67 Overhill Road, East Dulwich. Kirriemuir later found Scott unconscious and called for medical assistance. Scott was rushed to King's College Hospital in Camberwell, but he was pronounced dead on arrival at the age of 33. The official coroner's report determined the cause of death as acute alcohol poisoning and classified it as death by misadventure, a conclusion that reflected the excessive lifestyle and alcohol abuse that had long been part of Scott's life. Scott's funeral arrangements were handled with care and respect. His body was embalmed by Desmond Henley, later cremated, and his ashes interred at Fremantle Cemetery in his hometown of Fremantle, Australia. The death sent shockwaves through AC/DC. Initially, the remaining band members contemplated disbanding, struggling to envision continuing without their charismatic frontman. However, with encouragement from the Scott family and a shared determination to honor his legacy, the band eventually recruited Brian Johnson as their new vocalist. Notably, Scott himself had previously praised Johnson and his band Geordie to friends, comparing Johnson's raw energy to Little Richard and asserting that he had found a guy that knows what rock and roll is all about, a statement that would ultimately guide AC/DC into a new era. Despite the official account, controversy has lingered over the circumstances of Scott's death. In Jesse Fink's 2017 biography, Bon, The Last Highway, Fink explores alternate possibilities, suggesting that heroin or other factors may have contributed and questioning the thoroughness of the police investigation and coroner's inquest. Regardless of speculation, Scott's passing remains a defining moment in rock history. His untimely death at the height of his creative powers added a tragic poignancy to AC/DC's music and set the stage for the monumental success of Back in Black, an album dedicated in part to his memory. In addition to death, Bon Scott's personal life is also an aspect that interests many people. Reportedly, in 1971, Bon Scott's life took a major personal turn when he met Irene Thornton, a woman from Adelaide, during his time as the lead singer for the band Fraternity. Their connection was immediate, and by 1972 the couple had married. Their early years together coincided with Scott's rising musical career, a period marked by relentless touring, recording, and the lifestyle that often accompanied rock musicians of the era. Despite their initial affection, the pressures of Scott's burgeoning career and his personal habits placed strain on the marriage. After 2 years, the couple separated, and in 1977 their divorce was finalized. Nevertheless, the split did not sever all ties. Scott and Thornton remained on friendly terms, maintaining a relationship of mutual respect and affection until Scott's untimely death in 1980. Their enduring friendship suggests a bond that transcended romantic involvement, reflecting Scott's capacity for loyalty, even amid personal upheaval. Following his separation from Thornton, Scott embarked on a significant relationship with Margaret Silver Smith, another connection rooted in his hometown of Adelaide. They had met in the early 1970s, and their relationship endured through much of that decade. Though the two eventually parted ways in 1977, similar to his marriage with Thornton, Scott and Smith remained in contact until his death, maintaining a thread of personal connection despite the dissolution of the romantic relationship. These lasting friendships point to Scott's ability to nurture meaningful bonds, even as his life became increasingly dominated by music, travel, and the high-intensity rock and roll lifestyle that would define him. Scott's personal life was further complicated by his well-documented struggles with alcohol and drugs. Michael Browning, who managed AC/DC in the band's formative years, recounted in his book Dog Eat Dog a remarkable episode from 1975 when he visited Scott in a Melbourne hospital following a drug overdose. Browning's reflections reveal both the chaotic and audacious sides of Scott's character. According to Browning, Scott, even while recovering in hospital, boasted of simultaneously maintaining relationships with 2 women who were both giving birth to his children, each unaware of the other. Browning remarked, "So there's at least 2 of Bon Scott's children out there, or at least 2 I can vouch for." This anecdote captures the duality of Scott's persona, at once reckless and charismatic, driven by the pleasures and excesses of his lifestyle, yet also leaving a lasting mark on those around him. Through these relationships, a complex picture of Scott's personal life emerges. He was a man who sought deep human connection, whether in the form of marriage, long-term romantic partnerships, or friendships that endured beyond romantic involvement. Yet his life was also defined by the tumultuous realities of rock stardom, the pressures of fame, the lure of substance use, and the recklessness that often accompanied his extraordinary musical talents. The enduring bonds Scott maintained with Thornton and Smith, alongside the stories from Browning, underscore the contradictions that made him both a beloved figure and a cautionary one. An artist whose magnetic personality and unrestrained personal life would remain inextricably linked to his legend long after his death at the age of 33. Are you curious about Bon Scott properties? Although his birth took place in Forfar, Scott's formative years were spent in the nearby town of Kirriemuir, a small but culturally rich community that would leave a lasting impression on him. The Scott family lived in Kirriemuir's Bank Street area, a neighborhood reflective of the town's modest, working-class roots. Here, Scott's parents managed a local bakery, a family-run enterprise that anchored the household both economically and socially. The bakery was more than a place of work. It was a hub of community interaction where young Bon would have observed the rhythms of daily life, from early morning deliveries to the steady stream of customers, instilling in him an early understanding of routine, responsibility, and social engagement. The Kirriemuir home itself, while unassuming by modern standards, provided a nurturing environment during Scott's early childhood. Surrounded by the rolling hills and cobblestone streets of Angus, Scott grew up with the quiet, structured life of a small Scottish town, a stark contrast to the wild, frenetic energy that would later define his career as the frontman of AC/DC. Local accounts from Kirriemuir recall the Scott family as typical residents of the town, hard-working, community-oriented, and devoted to family life. It was in this environment that Ronald first developed the curiosity, humor, and rebellious streak that would later become hallmarks of his personality. The interactions, local folklore, and everyday life of Kirriemuir likely shaped his early worldview, blending the charm of Scottish small-town life with the seeds of a more adventurous spirit. In 1952, when Bon was 6 years old, the Scott family made the life-changing decision to emigrate to Australia, joining the wave of post-war families seeking new opportunities in the Southern Hemisphere. This move marked the end of Scott's Scottish childhood, but the experiences in Kirriemuir, the sights, sounds, and routines of his family home and local community, remained a formative backdrop to his early identity. The small-town bakery, the cobbled streets, and the close-knit social environment left an imprint on Scott, contributing to the mix of grounded common sense and mischievous curiosity that characterized his later persona. Although many biographical accounts focus on Scott's explosive career in Australia and his meteoric rise with AC/DC, his roots in Kirriemuir serve as a reminder that even the wildest rock stars often emerge from humble beginnings. The town and the family home, modest in appearance but rich in everyday experiences, provided a foundation for his early development, a place where the young Ronald Scott first learned about community, resilience, and the value of hard work. It was a quiet, ordinary life in Scotland that preceded the extraordinary journey he would undertake across continents, music stages, and ultimately into rock history. After leaving the familiar streets and cobbled alleys of Kirriemuir, Scotland in 1952, the Scott family embarked on a new chapter in their lives by emigrating to Australia. Like many families of the post-war era, they sought better economic opportunities and a fresh start far from the challenges of post-war Britain. Their first Australian settlement was in the suburb of Sunshine, located in Melbourne, Victoria, a working-class area undergoing rapid growth during the early 1950s. Sunshine, with its industrial backdrop and close-knit immigrant communities, provided a practical starting point for the Scott family as they adapted to life on a new continent. Bon Scott was just 6 years old when the family arrived in Australia. For a child accustomed to the quiet rhythms of Kirriemuir, Sunshine must have presented a startling contrast. The buzz of industry, the hum of trams and trains, and the constant movement of a suburb rapidly transforming from farmland into a hub of factories and housing developments. Biographical records consistently identify Sunshine as the Scott family's initial Australian home, emphasizing its role as a transitional place where Bon and his family navigated the challenges of migration, language, and culture. Scott's father, like many immigrants of the period, faced the daunting task of securing employment in a new country. The family's residence in Sunshine was likely modest, reflecting the economic realities of recently arrived migrants. Life in this suburb was centered around work and community, with families relying on one another for support as they adjusted to the unfamiliar social and economic landscape. Young Ronald would have been exposed to a variety of experiences that shaped his early perception of Australia, from the sights and sounds of the factory-filled streets to the camaraderie of local children playing in open spaces between the newly built homes. These early experiences likely contributed to Scott's adaptability, resilience, and ability to navigate diverse social environments, qualities that would serve him well in his later life as a touring musician. During this period, Scott began absorbing the multicultural influences of post-war Australia, including exposure to emerging rock and roll records on radio, community dances, and the local culture of working-class suburbs. While Sunshine was not a glamorous setting, it offered a grounding environment, providing the Scott children with stability while their father pursued work and the family acclimated to the new country. For Bon, these formative years were marked by observation, adaptation, and early curiosity, laying the groundwork for his later bold and charismatic stage persona. By the mid-1950s, after establishing some stability and sunshine, the Scott family eventually relocated to Western Australia, seeking more permanent opportunities and a climate that promised long-term prospects. Nevertheless, sunshine remained a critical early chapter in Scott's life story. It was the place where the young Scottish immigrant first confronted the challenges of displacement and cultural adaptation, where he learned to balance the weight of family expectations with his own burgeoning independence, and where he first began to absorb the cultural influences that would later shape his identity as a musician. Though unremarkable at first glance, the suburb of Sunshine provided the young Bon Scott with a foundation for resilience, curiosity, and adaptability, the qualities that would eventually help him navigate the chaotic, high-pressure world of rock and roll. After a period of transition in Victoria, including their first settlement in Sunshine, the Scott family ultimately relocated to Western Australia in the late 1950s, seeking greater stability and long-term opportunities. It was in North Fremantle, a riverside suburb known for its working-class charm and maritime heritage, that the family established what would become Bon Scott's principal childhood home. Initially, the Scotts rented a modest property in South Fremantle, but they soon purchased a red-brick Federation-style house on Harvest Road, a raised property offering commanding views over the Swan River. This home, cited in numerous biographies and local histories, came to symbolize Scott's formative years, shaping both his personality and the early experiences that would later influence his music and stage persona. The Harvest Road house was more than a simple residence. It was the centerpiece of Scott's childhood environment. Perched slightly above the street, the property provided a sense of openness and connection to the surrounding landscape, including glimpses of the river and nearby docks. For young Ronald, the house and its neighborhood offered a space for exploration, imagination, and early independence. He spent hours playing outdoors, often wandering the streets of North Fremantle, observing the comings and goings of a community that combined industrial labor, maritime trade, and working-class camaraderie. The home itself, sturdy, traditional, and distinctly Federation in style, reflected the aspirations of a family striving for stability in a new country, while also serving as a haven from the challenges of adolescence, migration, and social adjustment. Inside the Harvest Road home, Scott's upbringing unfolded against the rhythms of daily life, the smells of home-cooked meals, the sounds of family interaction, and the warmth of a household focused on resilience and adaptation. Though the Scott family was far from wealthy, the home provided security and continuity during a period marked by significant change and adjustment. It was here that Ronald experienced both the comforts and constraints of a conventional suburban childhood, learning responsibility and independence, while also nurturing the humor, wit, and observational skills that would later define his lyrics and public persona. The surrounding neighborhood contributed as much to Scott's formative years as the house itself. North Fremantle was a tight-knit community where children roamed freely and friendships were forged in streets, parks, and local schools. Young Bon's interactions with peers and neighbors offered him early lessons in social dynamics, mischief, and performance, a microcosm of the charisma and bravado he would later bring to stages worldwide. The combination of a secure home base, scenic surroundings, and a lively local environment provided fertile ground for his imagination, adventurous spirit, and early musical exploration. During his formative years in Fremantle, Western Australia, Ronald Bon Scott moved through a series of homes and local environments that collectively shaped the young boy who would later become one of rock's most legendary frontmen. While the Harvest Road house in North Fremantle is most frequently cited as his principal childhood residence, Scott's early life included time spent in rented properties throughout North and South Fremantle, reflecting the family's ongoing efforts to establish stability after emigrating from Scotland. Biographical accounts indicate that, before settling permanently on Harvest Road, the Scott family rented in South Fremantle, a vibrant working-class suburb with close connections to the docks, industry, and local community networks. These moves, though modest, exposed Scott to a variety of urban landscapes and social environments, nurturing his adaptability, streetwise sensibilities, and observational humor, traits that would later become central to his music and public persona. Education was a key part of Scott's Fremantle upbringing. He attended North Fremantle Primary School, where teachers and classmates would have first noticed his charisma, quick wit, and energy. These early school years coincided with his immersion in the culture of mid-20th century Fremantle, a community characterized by maritime work, modest homes, and close-knit neighborhoods. Scott later attended John Curtin High School, further embedding him in the local social fabric. School records, biographies, and anecdotal accounts repeatedly cite these institutions as the foundation of his youth, highlighting not only his academic experiences, but also the friendships, extracurricular activities, and social interactions that shaped his personality. It was in these schools that Scott likely first experimented with performance and self-expression, foreshadowing his later stage presence and larger-than-life persona. Beyond the family home and schools, Fremantle itself offered numerous spaces that became intertwined with Scott's early life. Local streets, parks, and community spaces formed the backdrop to his childhood play, exploration, and budding independence. Later in life, these same areas would be celebrated by fans and the media, who recognized the importance of Fremantle in shaping Scott's identity. After his untimely death in 1980, Fremantle became a center for commemoration. The Harvest Roadhouse, nearby streets, and the local cemetery in Fremantle are among the best documented addresses tied to his life, serving as tangible markers for fans and historians alike. Statues, memorial plaques, and guided fan tours frequently highlight these sites, allowing visitors to trace Scott's journey from local schoolboy to international rock icon. The continuing public interest in these Fremantle sites reflects both the enduring affection for Scott and the city's role in preserving his legacy. Local press routinely covers anniversaries of his birth and death, commemorative events, and cultural initiatives that honor his life and career. Fremantle's connection to Scott goes beyond nostalgia. It positions the city as a living repository of his early experiences, offering insights into the environment, community, and landscapes that nurtured his musical instincts, humor, and resilience. For scholars, fans, and casual observers, the constellation of Fremantle addresses and local sites, from rental homes to schools to memorials, remains the most vivid and accessible window into Bon Scott's Australian upbringing, a formative period that set the stage for his extraordinary, if tragically short, career in rock music. In the early weeks of 1980, Bon Scott returned to England, marking a brief but pivotal chapter in the final months of his life. Upon arrival, he reportedly secured a flat in Ashley Court, a distinguished portered mansion block located on Morpeth Terrace, a quiet street near Westminster, and within walking distance of Buckingham Palace. The building, with its period architecture, secure entry, and central location, offered a discreet and convenient base for a rock star accustomed to both public attention and private retreat. Several reputable accounts note that Scott rented this flat in January 1980, establishing it as his temporary London residence during the weeks leading up to his death. While the exact flat number is not consistently recorded, detailed timelines of his final weeks and sources, such as Louder Sound, identify Ashley Court as the hub from which he navigated the city, engaged in social visits, and participated in music-related activities. Ashley Court's location placed Scott at the heart of London's historical and cultural core, surrounded by a mix of diplomatic buildings, embassies, and high-end residences. The mansion block itself, with its portered security, elegant interior, and quiet privacy, provided a contrast to the chaotic nightlife Scott often inhabited. For a man who had spent the previous decade touring internationally and living the frenzied life of a rock star, this flat offered a measure of stability and a temporary home where he could rest, reflect, and prepare for musical engagements. It was also close enough to central London music hubs and recording studios to facilitate visits with friends, colleagues, and fellow musicians, including jam sessions and collaborative work that would mark his final creative efforts. During his stay at Ashley Court, Scott's days were reportedly a mix of social engagements, musical activity, and the excesses for which he had become notorious. This flat is frequently mentioned in retrospective accounts of his last weeks as a London base from which he moved between private visits, music studios, and nightlife venues. It was a discreet residence in a city that could otherwise be overwhelming for a visiting rock star, allowing him both connection to the musical community and a temporary sanctuary. Although brief, the flat at Ashley Court represents a tangible link to Scott's last days, a place where he was both an international figure and, for a few weeks, simply a visitor navigating a foreign city while continuing his lifelong engagement with music. What do you think about Bon Scott? Leave us your comments in the section below. We hope you have found this helpful video. Don't forget to leave a like, share, and subscribe to the channel if you like it. Thank you for watching this, and see you in the next videos. Goodbye.